not being able to do that these days. So enjoying dinner with my family and lots of yoga required. So I also want to just settle us in a little bit to where we're gathering. So that's the best thing about this. We're all coming together in different parts of the country. I like to just let you know that I'm coming from the Coast Salish territory of the Lekwungen and Wasanic nations. And I've been doing a lot of work in this area of really reckoning with my settler status here. What does that mean? How do I want to show up here? And one resource that's really supported me in this journey is the author Richard Wagamese. And I'm going to share a reading from Richard's book, Embers. And I think it really suits our content for tonight. So these are the words of Richard Wagamese. He's an Ojibwe. He's no longer in the physical world. He's an Ojibwe elder. And he says, the truth is that I have physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and moral limitations. But physically, I want to be healthy enough to do good work. Mentally, I want to be clear so that I can let go of thoughts that do not serve me. Emotionally, I want to be aware of my feelings so that I can surrender those that do not empower me. Spiritually, I want to walk in awe, wonder, respect, and humility through this universe. Morally, I want to be a human being I can be proud of. I don't need to know what perfect looks like, only better. I can move gracefully toward better every day. Every time I read from his words, it gives me goosebumps, and it also settles my heart rate a little bit. So I wanted to share that with you. And I want to share a practice that has been the gift to me this year. Sometimes those things you resist the most are the things you need the most. And I am really honored to have a colleague in Inspired Results Group, a coach who brings a mindfulness practice into everything that we do. And every time I'm gathering virtually now and working with leaders in particular, I like to offer this opportunity to practice mindfulness and accessing your breath. So this is an opportunity to practice, and it's totally up to you how you want to lean into this. I often encourage folks to just turn off your video just to create the space for you to go inward for a moment. And this is, you're going to hear the voice of, and Lorene, I'm going to look at you so you can give me a thumbs up that you hear the audio just to make sure that's coming through. It's about a 3.5 minute guided breath exercise, which is also going to help us physically, mentally, and emotionally settle into our time together. So enjoy.
Welcome to your moment of calm. I invite each and every one of you to find a position where your body can begin to soften. Plant all 4 corners of your feet onto the ground beneath of you. Feel the pinky toe edges of your feet. Feel the big toe edges of your feet. And feel both the inner and outer edges of your heels. A solid connection to the surface beneath of you. This is our invitation to get grounded. Start to let your sit bones take the same action to the seat beneath of you. Allow your hips to become steady, and as they root down, feel a lift up through your spine, tall back. Allow your shoulders to settle down away from your ears, creating length through the back of your neck. Lift the crown of the head up, and a softening of a slight tilt with your chin towards your chest. Open and close your mouth a few times here, releasing any held tension through your jaw. Allow a slight separation to stay between your teeth, and the back of your tongue becomes soft. Soften your eyelids and unfurrow your brows. Begin to notice your breath here. Notice how your chest rises and falls with each breath in and each breath out. We're going to be doing today what is called 4-part breath or box breathing. Take a deep breath out. And now breathe in through your nose, counting 4, 3, 2, 1. Now hold 4, 3, 2, 1. Open up your mouth, exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Stay empty 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep breath in through your nose. Hold. Open up your mouth, exhale. Stay empty. And let's do that again. Breathe in. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath. Feel it circulate through every cell of your body, bringing in a slight vibration. And now open up, exhale. Allow a deep sigh as you breathe up and out. Allow yourself to become completely empty and hold. And one last round. Breathing in. Holding your breath. Breathing out. Staying empty. This concludes your 4-part breathing for today. Notice how your nervous system has most likely dropped into your rest and digest state. And know that you can come back to this type of breathing anytime from anywhere to regulate your nervous system, calm your mind, and find stillness in your body.
Well, I know I needed that. So I just invite you to check in and just notice how you're feeling in this moment. And I'd love to just see a stream in the chat of phrases or words that just describe what are you noticing about your state of being right now. So I'll keep my eyes on the chat as we go. So let's dive into this conversation about resilience and being a resilient leader. I feel like this is the question we're all seeking the answer to right now. And I think it's helpful to just recognize this context that we're in and the context we've been in 2020. It's been stormy and just so tumultuous. And when we think about the systems disruption that have been going on, so at a macro level, we know that we are facing a climate crisis, a social injustice crisis. We've got healthcare in crisis. We've had political crises. We've got economic crises. And all of these systems are the systems that we're navigating all day long. And then we've got our work, and then we've got our communities and our homes and our families and our relationships. And what I'm noticing and really supporting people with, I guess, as a coach and staying curious about for myself is how do I want to show up in this crazy time of change? And how do I want to choose to be in all of this? And keeping in mind that idea that a lot is happening around us, and we are always in choice about how we want to navigate through this stormy time. So hold that idea of you are in charge of you're in charge of the choices that you make. And that's the question that I want you to hold as we explore this idea of resilience. And I guess the other context I want you to think about is the title is, being a resilient leader, and we're going to touch a little bit on leadership. And the way I think about leadership is first and foremost, it starts with you. Self leadership is really what we're talking about today. When you get clear on you, then you're able to show up and be the kind of leader you want to be outwardly. So we're not going to talk a lot about the doing of leadership in an organizational context. We're really going to explore, who do you want to be as a leader? And how do you find resilience in that being of leadership? So I've heard the word resilience, and the concept of resilience has kind of been out there for me and on the periphery, I would say, of my awareness and my interest, frankly, until this year. And, it's one of the classic things: what you focus on expands. If I want to buy a Honda, suddenly everybody's driving a Honda. I start thinking about resilience, and all of these resources start to show up. But most of all, I was really curious about, like, what does it actually mean, this idea of resilience, and why is it showing up everywhere, this word? Because we're all seeking it. And what does that actually mean? So I looked it up, went to the American Psychological Association resource to find out, what is this thing, resilience, and how are they defining it, so that I can make sense of it for myself, first of all, and then to be able to share it. And I'm actually going to highlight some key words that I think are important. So, if psychologists define resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, everything that we're experiencing right now. And then there's family and relationship challenges, health problems, workplaces. It's like all of this is coming at us right now. And so resilience is about this bouncing back from these difficult experiences. And it can also create or involve profound personal growth. And I think that last sentence is the gift. What can we learn about ourselves as we're navigating this stormy year, as we prepare ourselves for 2021? What have we learned about ourselves, about our resilience, and what do we want to take forward and really be intentional about in 2021? So I've been holding this question and observing my own experience and my own practices, and what has really shown up a lot in my own experience and in the conversations I'm having with leaders. And I mean, we're a community of women in this sense, and I'm always cautious about being gendered in my observations, because I do work with a handful of men as well. And I would say these observations are coming more from my conversations with women than they are in my conversations with men. So take that for what it is. But here's what I'm noticing. And this came up this week, big time. So I do a lot of work with strengths and, strengths finder reports. And often, we talk about, embrace your top 5, really celebrate the unique strengths that you have. And I noticed this resistance to really owning what makes us unique. And a lot of the women I work with, well, can't I be good at everything? Like, I don't want to have to limit myself to 5 or a top 10. Like, what about all 34 in that report? How do I get better at all 34 of those? So we want to have it all. We want to be everything. We want to be awesome at everything. This resistance, don't make me choose. Don't make me choose what's uniquely awesome about me. I still want to be awesome at everything. So I think this is creating some overwhelm. I do a lot of work, try to narrow down your values, own your core values, and so much resistance to that exercise. Don't make me choose. Don't make me narrow it down and be uniquely me. I want to be able to do it all, have it all of that kind of energy. We want to be at our best and on our game all the time. We don't want to show people the cracks. And this creates, I think, a lot of self-induced stress and pressure. So how can we get comfortable with showing some of the cracks? And the other thing that comes up often, maybe all the time, if it's not an overstatement, is we want to show up for everyone. We are showing up for the people in our lives. We're showing up for the people we work with. We're showing up, we're showing up, we're showing up. And women in leadership, I'm always asking, who is showing up for you? Who are you leaning on right now? Because I know you're showing up for a whole lot of people. And how is that contributing to what might feel like a sense of overwhelm or a sense that this is not sustainable? Because for a lot of us, it's not sustainable. So we're in resistance to choice around being ourselves, owning our strengths, leaning on our values, trusting our values, being willing to, good is good enough. And over here, I'm really going to knock it out of the park. And getting clear on who do I want to show up for, and who can I let lean on others, and most importantly, who is showing up for me. So this is some of the kind of coming out of the gate a bit soapboxy, a bit provocative, trying to challenge your thinking a little bit. Because I only have 45 minutes, so I don't want to mess around. It's like, okay, let's look at these things. So here's the premise that we're going to navigate our conversation around today. We're going to start with the premise that you are enough. And you don't have anything to prove tonight. You don't have any hustling to do. And I want you to lean on this idea that you are enough and I am enough in this moment. So here's the framework that I have been playing with and exploring for myself and sharing with others. And I'm really excited to share it with you tonight. And that's why the reading from Richard was so perfect, because I want us to think about resilience in a really kind of holistic way. And what is meaningful to me in this diagram is the fact that there's this overlay of these three levels of us as a human. And I think one of the reasons this framework has really emerged for me is the therapist that I work with always asks at the beginning of the session, we do this check-in, how are you arriving? And we do a check-in, how are you arriving physically? How are you arriving mentally? And how are you arriving emotionally? And that practice of checking in with myself and checking in with her on those three levels, I think has started to crystallize for me how they interplay. And when one is, out of balance, or one is feeling particularly weak or vulnerable in that moment, then the other two just don't work as well, or don't support me as well. So the interplay is really important. So I wanted to share some learning that I've had around these three layers to resilience. And my hope is that just one thing resonates for you tonight, one thing that you can take and practice in your life and in your leadership. And so this is the foundational piece, and maybe the obvious piece that we think of resilience. And I go back to that definition about adapting well, bouncing back. I think I will speak for myself, have thought about resilience through kind of that mental and emotional lens, but not through the physical lens. The physical lens has been more about fitness or losing weight or wanting my body to look a certain way or feel a certain way. But I wasn't intentionally connecting it, or consciously connecting my physical well-being to my mental and emotional resilience. And then 2020 arrives to show me over and over and over again how fundamental this is to my well-being, my resilience overall. So I don't want this to feel like the standard checklist of, yes, I know I should be sleeping more. I know I should be eating better. Um, I think hormones is something we need to talk about more everywhere, but definitely let's normalize that in a female environment. There is so much impact that hormones have on us and our emotional and mental well-being. So understanding that and getting support and whatever that looks like, I think we need to talk about that more. Exercise, I even want to change that word. It's like just moving your body. What do you enjoy? How does moving your body bring you joy? And how can you choose things that you'd like to actually do so it doesn't feel like a have to? I think alcohol consumption is something I want to start normalizing in terms of recognizing the impact that that has on certainly on our physical well-being, and of course, how that affects our mental and emotional well-being. Physical health, what else? It's like so many components to physical well-being. And this, like the small example, yet it was a big deal for me, was simply I hit the wall. They talk about the COVID wall, and I slammed into that wall hard in September and was very aware that I was not functioning well, and the work I do, holding space for conversations, and I was just struggling in that month of September. So finally went to the doctor. That had been a while, and did some blood work. Well, it turns out I'm a high functioning anemic, I guess, high functioning, but not feeling good about it. And so, yeah, just figuring that out and taking the supplements I need to take and just looking after that physical piece was huge. It's just absolutely changed the way I feel at every level. Um, and I'm doing my dance with the wine dance and recognizing that if I want to, be able to show up at my best for my clients and do the work in the way I want to, then I had to back off on what was becoming more of a daily wine habit instead of a weekend wine habit. So COVID, those boundaries around that had really changed for me. And it was also contributing to my inability to be resilient on a mental and emotional level as well. So all of these things I know I'm just, again, raising awareness to them and just inviting you to recognize one of these categories that might be an area that you want to experiment with, maybe change up the pattern a little bit. And so here's some questions, some good coaching questions to think about that. What do you want to start doing, or what do you want to stop doing? And what's working really well for you that you want to keep doing? Because I'm sure there's 85 women on this call. There's a lot of good practices happening that are supporting you physically. So we want you to keep doing what's working. And is there one area where you can either start or stop doing something that will contribute to your physical well-being? I'm going to actually invite you to drop into the chat, what are some things that really work for you in this physical resilience category? So drop in some ideas. I feel like there's just a ton of great ideas living in this space right now, and share them with your colleagues. Tell us what's working. I'm going to talk for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to take a breath, Lorraine, and check in if there's any questions or comments. So I'll just invite people, if you have a question, we'll do a little check-in in about 5 minutes. Because I want to share the mental pillar of this framework with you next. So cultivating mental resilience. This is more than a 10-minute conversation, but I have been thinking a lot about this. Like, what is working in this idea of mental resilience, and what have I been learning? What am I practicing? So I just want to plant this idea of, it's a bit of a neuroscience geek out in the moment here. I believe that mental resilience is about accessing good thinking. And I'm going to put this in the leadership context as well. This is my belief that our role as leaders is to inspire good thinking in the people around us. And so this slide is my shorthand for how do we help people access their prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is the brain where we do all of our good thinking, our creativity, our ability to hold multiple perspectives, decision making, rational thinking, all of that good stuff, innovation, it all happens up here in the prefrontal cortex. And the way the prefrontal cortex sort of comes online is when a couple of hormones are released in our bodies. And the one I want to focus on is called oxytocin. And so oxytocin is released when we are feeling good, when we are feeling joy, happiness, is one of the things that releases oxytocin. And so as an example, back when I call it like my coat, when I was in the COVID ditch and I'd hit that wall in September, and I remember I had to get ready to facilitate a session, like a 4-hour online session, and I was not feeling good. I knew I was more in my amygdala, that reptilian brain, and I needed to move into the prefrontal cortex so that I could think and show up the way I wanted to. And so I actually did something I've never done before. And I had about half an hour before we were starting. And I literally just Googled funny videos and just whatever came up. You know, some were kind of weird, some were really good. And one was awesome. And it got me laughing. And it was just what I needed, like almost the laugh, cry kind of laugh. And I could feel that oxytocin in my body. And then everything shifted. It's like, okay, I've got this. I can do this work. My brain, my prefrontal cortex is back and lit up and working again. And it was as simple as that laughter that released that oxytocin. So exercise, and the other, we know about endorphins, and it's in a similar vein. So again, if you are trying to access good thinking, if you need to make a decision or you want to problem solve, get your body moving. Don't sit. We're doing too much sitting. Sit and stare at your computer and hope that the answer will arrive. Get laughing, get moving, get that oxytocin going, because that will literally light up your prefrontal cortex. And I was doing a session earlier today, so I have to tell you this guide, we were asking, what are you doing differently in your leadership? And this guy, Steve, said, oh, we've set up like a just for fun thread in our Teams chat. And so they're sharing jokes, they're sharing photos, and they're sharing videos. And so we talked about that in the context of neuroscience. And it's like, that's actually, as a leader, that's actually a really great thing to be doing, because it is going to elevate the quality of the thinking in the group, in the room. And so that was like a bonus for him. He thought they were just having fun. And now he knows that if they have to solve a really big problem, they'll do it right after they've been sharing their jokes and having a good laugh together. So that's one message I wanted to leave you with, is to think about ways to access your prefrontal cortex, because that's what we're looking for in this resilience question, I think, is like, how do I access better thinking? And here's the other offering I have for you in the mental resilience bucket, is to really pay attention to your mindset. And here's how I want to think about mindset, is we have beliefs. Those beliefs drive our behavior, our actions, and that creates our outcome. And so when you want a different outcome, and my quick story around this is when I was trying to, this is a few years ago, practicing self-care, and I wanted to take better care of myself. It's more of a, I would call it like a lighter version of resilience. And I recognized that I needed to just take some time for myself on the weekends to do what I wanted to do. And I was continually resisting that. I was just not doing it. And so my actions, like it was not happening. It was not, I would schedule it and then I wouldn't do it, or I'd tell my family I was taking a nap or doing something for myself, and then I'd feel guilty the whole time. And it just, the actions just were not working. And so it took a conversation, a coaching conversation with a coach to kind of unpack this, to think about the beliefs I was holding around self-care, in that example. And, what surfaced in that conversation was that I was holding onto a belief that I am a selfish person. And it's one of those beliefs that, came about as a kid. I think I was really independent, and a lot of the time my parents really liked that. And sometimes they didn't like it. And so the behavior was labeled as selfish. So I remember that. I remember running up the stairs and hearing that you're so selfish, Diane. And I mean, I share this without judgment. We do these, this happens in parenting. And it planted a seed of identity for me that I was really not aware of consciously. So when that surfaced, that I was holding that belief, and I was able to reframe that belief, because actually, no, I'm not selfish. And in my adult conscious brain, I have a rational narrative that counters that belief. So it was actually very surprising to me how easy it was to let go of that old belief and instead adopt a belief that I'm worthy, I am generous, and I want to be taking better care of myself, so I can choose different actions. And so now those choices and the way I take care of myself is a lot different because I took the time to check in on those beliefs. Maureen, I'm just going to check in. Are there any questions that would be worth exploring, or does anybody have one now that they want to ask? I'm going to take a breath and check in.
So if anybody has any questions, maybe you can just raise your hand. Everybody's muted, or say if you can post it in the chat as well. I'll check. We can check that out. There was a question about the book that you referenced at the beginning. What is Richard's last name?
Right. I will drop into the chat so you guys can all see it.
Perfect.
I was scrolling the great practices you all do physically. I love that. Yeah, Richard Wake 'em Easy. Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah. And Embers is the book. Yeah. You can see all my sticky notes, how much I love it.
Lovely. Yeah. Are there any questions for Diane?
You got this mindset thing figured out?
We all know it, but doing it's a whole other thing, right?
Is kind of a whole nother thing. So let me, I'll take another breath in a minute and we'll check in. So here's a framework I just want to quickly share with you. If this topic of mindset has piqued your interest, this is a slightly different way to think about mindset, is this book. Now this book, drop in the chat if this book has crossed your path, if you've read it. This book literally did change my life, I would say. And I encountered this book 10 years ago, and it really poked to recognize the judger mindset that I had been carrying around for 40 some years before I discovered coaching. And we all have both judger and learner mindset. So in this pursuit of resilience, so back to connecting all the dots back to resilience here, I think this shift in my mindset has sustained me this year. And when I notice the judger showing up in my consciousness, and I pay attention, and I'll show you this slide, I'll bring it all up. When I practice more learner, so if something's going on, if I'm asking what's wrong, I want to change the question to, okay, what works? What's possible? the who's to blame comes up every once in a while these days. Instead, I want to ask, okay, what's my part in this situation? How can I prove I'm right? It's when my judger starts talking. Instead, it's like, what are the facts? What do we know to be true? Checking in. It's like, it's just accessing your curiosity. When this is the big one right now, if we want to stay in control, good luck. Like, who's in control of anything right now? Instead, it's like, what are my choices? What are my choices, and what do I want to choose in this moment? How could I get hurt is reframed to what can I learn? And this I think of in that whole taking risks category. Showing up with you here tonight feels vulnerable and risky, and what can I learn if I'm willing to take some risks? This is my favorite. This is the one that I'm always checking in on when that, why is that person so frustrating? When that voice shows up in my head. Instead, I'm like, whoa, how's that person feeling? Why bother? Nothing changes anyway. This ever come up at work? Instead, where can we make a change? And I think that's maybe the gift of COVID, is that we've had to make changes. We've been put in a situation where change is the daily. And I think that we've learned a lot about our adaptability. So where can we make a change? So this is my check-in. And the more I'm aligned with a learner mindset, the more mentally resilient I feel, and the less stuck. This is where, on the judger side, is where all that stewing and negative energy just starts to take on a life of its own. And when you're in the learner mindset, that energy doesn't exist. It can't survive when you're deeply embedded in your learner mindset. So I love sharing that book. And you can get it on Audible too if you want to walk and listen to the book. Oh, this is my other one. So this is a big one. I'm going to put this one in the leadership context. This is a quote from Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements. So I'm just going to read it out, and I want you to just take this in. If others tell us something, we make assumptions. And if they don't tell us something, we make assumptions to fulfill our need to know and replace the need to communicate. Even if we hear something and we don't understand, we make assumptions about what it means, and then we believe the assumptions. We make all sorts of assumptions because we don't have the courage to ask questions. Assumptions, it's a natural part of being human that we make up stories. And if you're a Brené Brown follower, she talks about the shitty first draft. That's another word for assumptions. So we make up stories, we make up assumptions. Our brain works that way. And we want to just pay attention to the assumptions that we're making. And as we're stressed and under this constant uncertainty and rapid change, I notice that our assumption patterns are definitely leaning more to the negative than to the positive. And so this isn't about never making assumptions. I don't think that's humanly possible. This is about raising your awareness of where you make assumptions and encouraging you to ask questions. Stay curious about what's going on for people. In a workshop I was doing a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this in the leadership context. The group kept asking, like, how do we keep our employees engaged? How do we keep our employees engaged? And so I asked the question, what assumptions are you making about your people in this question of engagement? And what surfaced was that, all of these things we're trying to figure out now, it's like, oh, they have their video off. So they're making an assumption that they're not engaged because the video's off. Or they're quiet, they don't speak up in a meeting in a virtual setting. They're making an assumption that they're not engaged. So check in, ask more questions, Don't take the shortcut of making assumptions, because the reality is we really don't know what's going on for other people. And I catch myself in assumptions all the time. I had a leader that she was late for the second time, like 20 minutes late for a 1 hour session. And, my own amygdala and my got kicked up. I was frustrated. So my assumptions got really negative. Oh, she doesn't value this experience. She's not committed to the process. Little negative judger narratives started to show up. And so she got onto the call, and the short story is, she was late that day because a friend of hers she just found out that morning that a good friend of hers had died. She was late for our meeting the previous week, she told me, because she was being lambasted by her boss. And that's a whole nother story about what was going on for her there. But this woman showed up, committed to the coaching, and all of this was going on, but I was making a bunch of assumptions about what her being late was all about. So we are constantly getting this wrong, even when we're, aware that this is a thing. So practice, stay curious, work with this judger, learner, and assumptions. It's a total game changer to your leadership and to your resilience. Lorraine, I'm going to keep going just because I realize how quickly our time is going, and then I'm just going to open up for some Q&A before we close out. So the emotional state for resilience. Now I'm going to just be honest about the fact that I'm sourcing Ask and It Is Given from Abraham Hicks. The way they frame this list of emotions is actually what they call the emotional state for manifesting. And I've got it in a handout, I guess you'd call it, it's been on my bulletin board for years. And when I looked at it this week, I thought, wow, this is the emotional state for manifesting, but this is the emotional state for resilience. And these are the emotions that we need more of in our lives if we are going to stay resilient in the weeks and months ahead. So just have a scan of that list of emotions. And the other quote I'll offer you that really stood out for me last week when I was facilitating Dare to Lead, and we listened to these videos from Brene, and the one quote that, of course, because I'm thinking about resilience all the time, she said, "The most resilient among us are those who can name their emotions and get curious about them." So the most resilient among us can recognize our emotions, name them, and then get curious about them. So we don't judge them, we just get curious about them. And so if there's an emotion here that's really speaking to you, then my follow-up question for you is, how are you going to create more of that? How are you going to intentionally create enthusiasm or positive expectation or optimism? What do you need to do to bring that emotion forth? What are you going to choose to do to bring that emotion forth? I'm not even going to sit on the what gets in the way list. It's just a quick look to say, yes, 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 yes. We've all been feeling these things this year. And this is what we want more of. So what choices will we make to create that? And back to this interplay of all of these things, physical, mental, emotional. Here's another nugget quote for you. This is from Dr. Antonio Damasio, quoted in Dare to Lead. And he says, "We are feeling machines who think. We are not thinking machines." I don't love thinking of ourselves as machines, but the point being, the quality of our thinking is absolutely informed by our emotions. We know that, and yet we still think and act from that place, from the negative emotion place. So I want you to think in this resilience journey about, how can I shift my emotional state before I do the thinking and decision making or communicating? I'm catching myself a lot in the, I don't think I'm really fit to have a conversation right now. What do I need to do to access some emotions that are going to really support me right now? This really stood out to me. And if you're a Brene follower, you've probably heard her talk about joy. And so joy collected over time fuels resilience, ensuring that we'll have reservoirs of emotional strength when hard things happen. And they do happen and they are happening. So joy is going to be my theme word for 2021. It's like, what brings me joy? I had a great conversation with a client this morning. We were talking about, actually, she showed up and she modeled all of this for me today. She talked about, like, she just was a different human being in this call. And when we talked about it, it was more yoga, more curiosity, and doing things and more choice. She said, doing things like cleaning the cupboard felt like a chore, but when I did it, it actually brought me a lot of joy. And I was telling her that I cleaned out my absolutely disgusting freezer a few weeks ago. And when I open that freezer and look at that clean, tidy, decluttered space, it brings me so much joy. And it's feels kind of ridiculous, but it feels really joyful. And so what else is bringing you joy? The freezer example may not be it for you. I totally understand. But what is it that brings you joy? Is it your family? Or, I mean, this is why everybody's getting pets now. It's like they're joy machines, these beautiful little creatures. So what can you do to cultivate more joy in your life? So here's, I guess, the questions I want you to leave with tonight. And I'm still open to answering a couple of questions, maybe some coaching. But I want you to leave thinking about these questions. What brings you joy? And how will you bring that in more often? What will you practice daily in this realm of resilience? What can you bring in on a daily basis? And what do you need to let go of? Probably the most important question on that list. What can you let go of as you think about a resilient version of you in 2021? Lorene, I'm going to just stop talking and see what's coming up, and if there's any questions that we can have a conversation about.
There's a great question from Sarah Scott who says, what is the balance of letting yourself feel those emotions that get in the way versus the state of emotional resilience? We can't always bottle them up.
Oh my
So
gosh.
what is the balance?
Such a good question, Sarah. And if you haven't listened to the Unlocking Us podcast yet, the Burnout book, the authors Emily and Amelia Nagoski, I hope I get it right, talk about exactly that question. And they talk about, so if we build on Brené's concept of like recognize the emotion, and then I think of it as like, then you've named it, you're looking at it, you see it, you feel it. And in the Burnout book, they talk about moving through that emotion, going through the tunnel. And they have similar suggestions, walking or movement. Actually, they talk about a practice of hugging for 20 seconds, a kiss for 6 seconds, and joy, laughter, humor, and a good cry as ways to move through that emotion, Sarah. So yeah, practice those things. Exactly. We don't want to bottle it up. We want to move through it and release it. And step number 1, I think, is naming it, developing that emotional literacy.
And
Yeah.
nature too, in terms of the amygdala response, right? They're saying that being in nature can really help to regulate your system for that purpose. Just to offer that as well.
So good.
Let's see.
Thanks, Sharon, for dropping that into the chat. Awesome.
Karen says, often we get caught up with wanting to be resilient without realizing we need to have a challenge to build resilience. We need the uncomfortable feeling to become resilient. That's probably very true. Does anybody else have a question for Diane? If you do, you can put it in the chat box or raise your hand. I haven't seen any hands raised, so unless I'm missing it.
I have a question.
Yeah, come on in.
Now, I've been a big fan of, well, I love the book Burnout. I mean, I read it after it first came out, and just they're so bang on so many things that we just aren't talking about. So anyone who hasn't read Burnout, highly recommend it. And of course, Brene Brown. I mean, what's not to love about Brene Brown? Her talk with Whitney Johnson was amazing a few weeks ago. And what are your thoughts about, like, for me, I found Susan David's work around paying attention to our emotions and how they align with our values. For me, when the emotions are coming up, usually there's a disconnect with my values. So what are your thoughts on that?
So if the emotions are kind of rooted in conflict or discomfort, that kind of emotion, Sharon?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great frame to think about it when you want to get curious about why am I feeling this way? Absolutely, it's probably connected to a value that's not being recognized or utilized, and sometimes it's us. It's like I'm not being, I mean, courage is one of my core values, and often when I'm having those yucky feelings, it's because I'm opting out of courage and taking the easy route, and it doesn't actually feel good. So I love that. Yeah, come back to the values to be clear about who you are and how you want to show up. And if you have some dissonance going on emotionally, get curious about that in relation to the values, for sure. Thanks, Sharon.
And we have one more question. Sorry. Is it Conique Simons or Simmons? Can you unmute yourself?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
So my thing is being in the field of mental health and helping others. I've always felt like I'm a natural caretaker. And when you first came on, you were speaking about enlighten to empower. And a lot of times in my job, when we get that sense of accomplishment, we see a client making progress or coming to the other side, coming from the darkness into the light, it's empowering in itself. But my thing is, how do I continue to, as a leader, to not lose that or gain that enlightenment where I can carry it on into empowerment and not slip accidentally in from enlightened to enable? Does that make sense?
Oh, it sure does. Yeah. Yeah. And so big question to answer with out a lot of time or context. So here's what I'll offer up. I've been talking a lot about practicing empathy with boundaries. And if you haven't read Dare to Lead, there's a great section on empathy misses. And sometimes with empathy, we get in that emotional field with people. And when we're in it with them, then we're enabling. When we're holding that space for them with a boundary between us and them, like not a closing boundary, but just a healthy boundary, we're able to hold them capable and support them through their experience, but we don't need to get hooked or into it with them, is how I think about it in a coaching context. And I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's what I can offer you here tonight.
Such a good question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Reminds me to go back and read Dare to Lead again. There's so much in there that, really super helpful. And Sarah Black says, super helpful as an empath that tends to take on others' emotions.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Oh, Diane, we could go on, and I wish that we could. I'm sure lots of people have questions for you. So if you could, yes, we'll share with everyone your contacts. If people want to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Probably the email here, diane@inspiredresultsgroup.com, or you can visit our website, and we've got lots of free resources there if that's helpful to your leadership and resilience.
Very good.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. That means a lot, and I wish you a restful holiday season.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. Wonderful presentation by Diane Lloyd. Please contact her if you have further questions. And remember that we have a monthly speaker series through the Women in Leadership Victoria chapter. We had a great turnout tonight, and I hope that you'll join us for more sessions in 2021. We'll be beginning again in January. And go to our website at Will Victoria Chapter to apply to be a speaker. We are always looking for interesting speakers, and I'm sure we have plenty of talent on the call with us tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Diane. We really appreciate you being with us.
Well, thank you, Lorraine and Heather, for including